said I should check out this creator. Somebody in a live stream the other day told me too. I know about this dude. He seems like a good person. I don't really care to engage with apologists except to discuss science and critical thinking. I know John thinks evolution is real and Earth isn't flat, so as far as I'm concerned, like, no big deal. I don't try to persuade people not to believe in their religion, but I don't let people get away with bad epistemology, and holy crap, did I find some bad epistemology.
Yes, the gospel writers were writing decades after the death of Jesus. And I think this is a point that gets lost on a lot of Christians.
Of course, there are things that you're just not going to remember because they're not important to you. But myself, for example, I have many memories that I can remember vividly. For example, I can remember when I was about 2 years old getting punished because I refused to put away my toys, having my mom take away the toys and putting them away for me in a place where I couldn't have access to them. I can remember the layout of the house. I can remember the toys she took away. I can remember where she placed them. I can remember the temper tantrum I was throwing. All these are very vivid memories to me.
So this is an insane false equivalency. Apologists do this thing where they say, a lot of people claim blank. Here's a completely different example of blank that is nothing like blank in terms of complexity, magnitude, time scale, time and place, evidence, or logic. So he specifically brought up something that had to do with his childhood. To make it a good comparison, we should compare apples to apples. So, him. I can vividly remember stuff from my childhood. So we have a first-hand account of the person telling the story about their own life from when he was a child. Never mind the fact that we know people can mistakenly invent stories that never happened with incredible detail. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. But what we have here is the person who the story is about directly giving us the information. Is that even remotely close to what the Gospels are? No. Okay, so his story is about him getting in trouble when he was young. Amazingly, we have a story like this in the Gospel of Luke. The setup is Joseph and Mary took Jesus to Jerusalem for the festival of Passover. Jesus was 12. Somehow, they had been traveling back home for an entire day before realizing Jesus wasn't with them. Some blessed mother you are. It took them 3 days to find him. And now what I'm going to do is read directly from the Gospels. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been searching for you." "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying to them. Okay, the earliest date for Luke is 80. That's nearly 74 years after this story took place. John, I'm going to assume you're 30, so we have 24 years versus 74 years. And who is telling this story? Not Jesus, not anyone who was there when it happened. To make these accounts equivalent, I need somebody who knows John to tell literally thousands of people the story of when he was 6, and they need to tell thousands of people. That's how the Gospels were spread. I'll subtract the 24 years it's already been. So then in 51 years, this story needs to be actually written down. But to be consistent, it needs to be written down by somebody who doesn't speak English, because Jesus and his followers spoke Aramaic and the Gospels were written in Greek, and then dictated to somebody who's part of the chain of thousands of people who have been told thousands of people the story over and over a period of 51 years. If that story can be copied down without error, then you would kind of have a point. Because I'm a prophet, I know what will happen next. Something, the words don't have to be 100% exact, something, this story is just a metaphor. You can't have it both ways. The book cannot be the inerrant, inspired, perfect word of God. That's also the metaphorical, not literal, perfect word of God. Especially because we are meant to believe that prophecy is being fulfilled. The details are not just important, but critical. And if this story need not be true, that undermines the credibility of every story. It doesn't make the entire works of the Gospels wrong, but since we can't know if this one story is literally true, we can't know if any individual story is literally true. So you can't make that argument without imploding your overall argument.
I actually do not know if the apostles kept notes, and it's a real possibility that they did.
See, this is manipulative and sneaky. Of course, them being literate is possible. It's overwhelmingly likely that they weren't. The only appropriate word is improbable. Virtually nobody in those times was literate. Those that were would have been professionally trained scribes, some merchants, perhaps some bankers, the high priests, and a few others. We know almost nothing bibliographically, I can't speak, about the apostles, except that like 4 or 5 of them were fishermen. Literate fishermen? Decide for yourself. Now, Matthew, we are told, was a tax collector. Perhaps he was literate or semi-literate, but not in Greek, which is what the Gospels are written in. The language of the Roman Empire was Latin. That's who a tax collector would have collected taxes for in first century Palestine. But even if we are being super generous, this gets us to perhaps, not we know, or it's likely that. Also, Matthew didn't write Matthew. We'll get to that in a bit.
Also, contrary to popular belief, it was not uncommon for people to write things down in this time period. Alan Millard also argues that the vast amount of personal letters, legal deeds, divorce certificates, writing on coins, and ossuary inscriptions that were clearly not written by scribes strongly suggests that the literacy levels were relatively high and widespread.
That's an unbelievable statement. It does not prove that. In fact, in light of what we know, it doesn't even suggest that. You don't have to be literate to copy stuff. Any one of us could copy a letter written in a different language. And we know for a fact that this happened with the Gospels because there are manuscripts that contain known errors that no literate person could make. For example, one person copied the lineage of Jesus, but got the order so wrong that they put God in the middle. Even for people who were semi-literate, copying was a nightmare. Ancient Greek has no punctuation, no lowercase letters, and no character spacing. There were no gaps between the letters or words, and no punctuation to separate ideas.
If we go to the Gospel of Luke 1:1-3, we can see a claim on the attempt to keep history, in which it says, "Since many have undertaken to compile an account of these things accomplished among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word."
Hey, let's play Name That Fallacy. That's right, begging the question. Why should we have confidence that the words of the gospel are correct? What evidence do we have? The Gospels themselves say so. I also have a book, and this book is true. There, that proves it.
We don't even know that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the writers of the Gospels. Church tradition holds that these are the writers of the Gospels, but they're all anonymous. They didn't say, like, I'm Mark and I'm writing this. No, they're anonymously written.
Yep, that's right. Every single person in church history says that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John was written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
I actually have no idea what he's doing here. He's obviously being condescending and sarcastic, but what was his point? That people who haven't studied or learned of studies undertaken of the authorship of the Gospels believe, for no good reason, that they were authored by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? This is willful ignorance and the purposeful, deliberate suspension of critical thinking. People who have taken an objective, academically rigorous approach to this, people who are mostly Christians, think otherwise. Not impressed.